Hi folks, Dr. Rob Cyrus. I am the Carb Addiction Doc, and today I have a treat for me and a treat for you, the audience. I am going to be doing a podcast with Dr. David Kessler, and Dr. Kessler has just written a new book. It's his third book, Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, The New Science of Achieving a Healthy Weight, discussing his own journey and the journey of America through obesity and what really needs to be done. But as we set up this interview, Dr. Kessler also dropped another bombshell. And the bombshell is that he is the author, together with the top food lawyers in the United States, of a petition to the FDA, a petition to limit the exposure of refined carbohydrates used in industrial processing in order to prevent obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease in children and adults. Dr. Kessler has launched a petition that is a massive, massive starting point for a transformation in the food industry's approach to the type of food that has made us fat and sick, that causes metabolic disease. Now, who is Dr. Kessler? And this is really just ridiculous. Every chapter of Dr. Kessler's life is pretty much a lifetime for most mere mortal people. If you live one chapter of his life, you've lived a fulfilled life. Let's go through the list. Number one, David Kessler started out at University of Chicago, arguably one of the top law schools, where he obtained his JD. But before he got his JD, he transferred across to the University of Harvard Medical School to become a doctor. And he finished his JD while he was at Harvard Medical School. Then he went on to become a board-certified pediatrician and subsequently went on into more of the public health administrative side, where he became the dean of the Faculty of Medicine at UCSF, and then subsequently at Yale, another big Ivy League medical school. Subsequently, he went more into public life and was appointed as the commissioner of the FDA. And the beauty is it was both under George H.W. Bush, a Republican, as well as then Bill Clinton, a Democrat. So he served as FDA commissioner during that time. And his claim to fame initially was that he started the big tobacco exposure. So he took on big tobacco, and his work, his sentinel work, really resulted in the transformation we've seen in the tobacco industry. He also is the designer and the author of the nutrition label that we see on all products. And he will tell you himself, he's very proud of this accomplishment, but he's equally concerned about something that was not discussed. And part of today's discussion is what we are going to rectify in that labeling and in dietary policy. So Dr. Kessler then went on to become the chief science officer at the White House. And when COVID hit and after COVID, became the director or driver of Operation Warp Speed, which was the US's policy against COVID. Welcome, Dr. Kessler. I am in awe of your history, but let's get into today and tomorrow. Let's get a little bit personal. The first question in your book, and the book we're discussing is this guy right here. It is Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, The New Science of Achieving Healthy Weight. You have had your own personal battles with weight. And I think over time, as I read this book, you've realized that the weight wasn't the problem. It was the culmination of the consequence of a problem. How has your thought process of what causes obesity and what one needs to do to address it, not only in terms of losing weight, but sustaining the effect, how have you navigated and kind of peeled the onion of understanding weight and the health journey required to reduce that weight and keep it that way?
So a lot in that question. Very excited to have this conversation with you. I think there's the issue of what that weight causes and then what causes that weight. So let's just start with the latter for the moment. I don't think the problem is weight. I don't think the problem is how big or small you are. I think we're in an incredible period of time where the issue is this convergence I see. If you talk to nephrologists, endocrinologists, obesity medicine docs, obesity, bariatric surgeons. I think we're all waking up to the fact that there is this metabolically active toxic fat, right? It gets into the liver, gets into the heart, right? Gets into places where it doesn't belong, and it causes enormous damage. And then much of our chronic disease, is driven by this visceral adiposity. And that is a enormous confluence, I think, of, a lot to get to that point. Right? But if we can reduce that visceral adiposity, I think that many forms of certainly cardiovascular disease, right? 25% of us are going to end up in heart failure. 30 to 40% are going to end up with diabetes. 25% of us will have a stroke, right? We may not be living shorter lives, maybe a little, but certainly those, 5, 6 of those years, at the end of our life will be spent in disability. And much of that, I think, is due to this metabolic harm, this inflammatory soup, this fat that gets into the wrong places that's causing this cardiometabolic harm, right? And I think that's a profound convergence of where medicine is going. I think the cardiologists still, want to talk about cardiac disease, the nephrologists, but increasingly, right, they are willing, in part because of these clinical trials that we've seen with the new anti-obesity medicines, because we are seeing real survival advantage. And you can actually show reductions in this visceral adiposity. In these inflammatory markers. And weight is certainly driving it, but it's really weight in the wrong place. So did I get that right?
You did, but that lends a question to me, and I think it's so important that we understand the history of how we got to where we are. I think
the ability to reclaim our health, right? Absolutely. We'll get to it in a minute.
But here's the question. You see, you keep talking about fat, and I appreciate that. But the change in thinking that I've certainly had, and I believe you have, is we were forewarned that the consumption of fat was driving that illness, that deposition of fat. And I think you and I have both reached a point now where we understand is that it's the manufacture of fat within our bodies from other substrates that is more toxic rather than the consumption of fat.
Right. So no doubt it is fat in the liver that is a primary driver, right? That those free fatty acids, that inflammatory milieu, that decrease in insulin clearance, everything that happens in the liver, right? Because of that excess visceral adiposity, the downstream, the cardiac, the renal, the metabolic, right? So can we agree that there is an enormous opportunity to reclaim our health?
Yes.
Right? If we can get that fat out of our midsection, out of our organs, right? We're not going to cure everything, but a very substantial part of chronic disease, right? It's what you've dedicated your career toward, right? And you see remarkable changes in health. If you can get rid of that visceral adiposity. Fair?
I agree completely. And in fact, you've taken action on that better than I can do at an individual level with the petition that you've put before the FDA and before the HHS. I want to read the title. It's a petition to limit the exposure of refined carbohydrates used in industrial processing in order to prevent obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease in children and adults.
So now you're getting to what's causing this visceral adiposity.
There we go.
I understand. I understand. It took me a couple of minutes to get to, for us to get in sync, right? But the fact is, we have to understand what's at stake, right?
Agreed.
And there's an enormous amount of chronic disease, right, that is being caused, right, by this metabolic state, right? And the question is, what's driving it?
Yes.
So, if you look, right, this explosion, let's see if we can date. This explosion in adiposity really starts 1970s, 1980s, fair, in the United States?
Completely agree.
Right. And we now know that, we can have different terminology, but what's changed in that last 4 or 5 decades, right? And what's the driver? The there's been a lot of talk, right? I actually prefer the term ultra formulated foods, right? But I mean, conventionally, they're called ultra processed foods, right? And I think it's fair to say that we know that these processed foods, right? You took fat, sugar, and salt, you put it on every corner, you made it available 24/7, you made it socially acceptable to eat anytime. We live in a food circus. And the fact is, you end up eating 600 calories more if you're on this ultra processed diet. So, I mean, so ultra processed foods are a primary culprit, right, behind this epidemic of chronic disease and metabolic harm. Now, what makes up these processed foods, right? What happened here? Right? I mean, the way I view it.
Yeah, can I stop you for 1 second? Can you give us your definition of ultra processed food? We've been discussing that internally with a group of gurus, and nobody's quite got consensus.
So in some ways, I bypass that.
Okay.
I mean, I actually, the petition, right? Read the petitions, read the name of the petition again, just in front of you.
Right. It says to limit the petition to limit the exposure of refined carbohydrates used in industrial processing.
But there's a specific focus on processed refined carbohydrates. In some ways, I bypass that, but I do it in the context of this ultra processed food. So let's just start. Let's see if we can, track this. I mean, I see ultra processed foods going back 1940s, 50s, 60s in order to ship food over long distance, to be shelf stable for convenience. The industry learned to take cheap ingredients, right? Flour, starch, and out of them, right, they were able to formulate through processing. I mean, there's really I see it as four legs of the stool. There's refined sweeteners. They take starch and they can make out of that starch, they can make starch conversion products. You can make all these different industrial products, whether it's xylose or invert sugar or dextrose or glucose syrups or corn solids or high fructose corn syrups, right? I mean, all of it comes from that starch. So you have these refined sweeteners on one leg. You have refined flours and starches on another leg. You have fats and oils in a third leg. And let's say you have salt. Salt's really not structural, right? But it drives consumption. So you have those four legs. And again, I mean, I recognize a lot of people much smarter than I have been thinking about what ultra processed foods are. Again, I think of them, I prefer the term ultra formulated, because what did the industry do? I mean, it sort of created this alternate universe of substances, right? By taking those cheap ingredients, right? Those refined sweeteners, those refined flours and starches, those fats and oils and salt, and formulating them, right? And then out of those four legs, those four sets of ingredients, through processing, I mean, through use of humectants and emulsifiers and other chemicals and other altered starches, they were able to produce thousands of different products that fill the supermarket aisle, right? But, what's ultra processed? Are there healthy foods that are ultra processed? I bypassed that definition because I didn't want to get into that quagmire.
Yeah.
I basically said, at the core, that underbelly of those ultra processed foods, I see as refined sweeteners, refined flours and starches, those flours and starches that are subject to extrusion technology, those flours and starches and sweeteners that are used with humectants and dough conditioners, and these other chemicals. But I said, look, I'm not going to solve all of ultra processed foods, right? But about 80% of them, my guess, have as at its core, not only have these processed refined carbohydrates. So what are those, right? So those are the refined sweeteners, right? Such as corn syrup, corn solids, glucose syrups, dextrose, invert sugar, maltose, high fructose corn syrups, maltodextrin, all these terms on the ingredient panel, right? We've never really understood what they are.
Right.
Right. But they're in that food. And I went back and I asked, all right, I focused on these processed refined carbohydrates. Okay. left aside the fats and oils for a second, left aside the salt. I'm not saying that they're not relevant. I'm just saying I can't deal with everything. And
Right. Refined
I asked a
carbohydrates.
very simple question, right? I mean, you said that you were very nice in the introduction, right? But I went to law school. I took on tobacco when I was at FDA. The first time we did the food label, right? I wrote 3 books along the way. And I sort of, all of a sudden, I started thinking the nation's food laws, the food additive laws, are actually some of the strongest in the world. I mean, if you want to add something to food, you want to be a food additive, you have to show reasonable certainty of no harm. That's the standard. And you have to prove. And so you have this, and it's interesting. It's not like a drug. A drug, you weigh risks and benefits, right? What's the benefits? What's the risk? Food additive, simply reasonable certainty of no harm. You have to prove it. The industry has to prove it. Now, there was an exception in the law that was passed by Congress in 1958 that said if you're generally recognized as safe, GRAS.
By what standard?
So it's the same standard as the food additive. You have to be reasonable certainty of no harm according to the law, right? But if you're GRAS, you didn't have to go prove, right, reasonable certainty of no harm. You can get on the market.
So it's a loophole that you can use that you don't have to qualify by studies or by independent verification.
Well, you have to verify, you have to state it, right? But when it was looked at, it was very interesting. I went back, and in the 1970s and 1980s, there is something, it was called the Sweeteners Task Force, the Sugar Task Force, and at FDA, and they looked at these refined carbohydrates. They called them nutritive saccharides. Refined, so this is the corn syrups, the corn solids, the dextrose, the maltodextrin. And they concluded back in the 1970s that there was no association between these ingredients and obesity, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes.
But isn't that what the tobacco industry did in front of Congress, saying that there's no harm from nicotine? Is that not the same? You're leveraging that, but is that not exactly the same?
Let's get to that in a second. I mean, you're right. Just as nicotine caused millions of people to be addicted and sickened to tobacco, so do processed refined carbohydrates cause much of chronic disease. I will grant you that. I think there's a difference, and I could be wrong here. But we did the investigation into tobacco, right? Now, understand how tobacco started. How back in the 1980s, the tobacco movement really had hit a wall. It had done labeling, the Surgeon General's warning. It had done, secondhand smoke. You couldn't get on a plane. But the tobacco control movement didn't know where to go next. But there was the American Cancer Society, American Heart Association, the American Lung Association submitted a petition to FDA and asked FDA to regulate low-tar cigarettes as a drug. It was a little strange because low-tar cigarettes, you go, well, those are the safer cigarettes maybe. Right. So why regulate those as a drug? So it took us several years to reframe the question, right? Not are low-tar cigarettes a drug, but first we asked, is tobacco a drug? And then we changed it to, is nicotine a drug?
Right. That was a central thing.
And it was a citizen's petition that was there. And that gave us the regulatory hook to begin the 3-decade-long journey. And you see, when we started, tobacco use among high school seniors was like 25%.
Well, let me say, is that the reason why you focused on the processed carbohydrates instead of the other 3 legs?
So I was looking for what's the regulatory hook? What's the legal hook? Under the law today, not something that Congress has to pass in the future.
Well, that was the other question, is because that's where you failed with the FDA tobacco side. Is they said, what was the language that the...
Well, there was a question, the Supreme Court 5-4, don't want to get political, but, I thought that, the question was nicotine a drug? I think some members of the court just didn't see, they thought nicotine was in there for flavor, for satisfaction. They didn't get that nicotine was a drug, right? Ultimately, we got legislation that enacted our rule. But let me just give you 2 other pieces of law. Okay. So in order to be GRAS, right? Just because you were GRAS in the 1970s and you got on in the 1970s, right? You still have to prove your GRAS today, right? So just because you got on the market doesn't give you a free pass. you still have to be GRAS. And the burden is not on the FDA to show that these are unsafe. The burden is simply to show that there's not a consensus among experts that these are safe. And then the burden shifts to the industry to have to show if it wants to be GRAS. Now, one other piece of the law that's important is the law requires, in determining GRAS, to take into account the cumulative effect of the substances and like substances, right? So it's how it's used in practice. It's not that, if I have, the industry will argue, well, just in moderation, right? You just have one can of, or one serving, that's not going to do you harm. So the question is, if you look over the last 5 decades, it's almost, correlation is not causation, but it is remarkably, you just look at where ultra-processed foods have gone and the increase, right? And you look at obesity and those curves match.
They're parallel, yeah.
So the issue is, in 2015 and 20s, I told you that the GRAS determinations where they saw no link between obesity, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes, right? And that's what the Federal Register shows. I went and I looked at just the Dietary Guidance Advisory Committee in 2015 and 2020.
Right.
And you see processed refined carbohydrates. There's a link between obesity, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. And so the science, in this petition, 60 pages, I lay out all the science, but the fact is there is no expert consensus that refined carbohydrates and ultra-processed foods are safe under present conditions of use. And if there's no consensus, they can't be generally recognized as safe, which means there is no legal basis to sell or market these products, which means the industry has to do what? Right? Once you recognize, now look, this administration, whether it takes action or not action, some argue I gave them a gift by putting.
Well, I'm going to argue because there's some new information that's just come out this past week that I want to discuss with you. But I hear what you're saying about the GRAS element. However, in FDA versus Brown and Williamson tobacco, I think that the FDA dodged the question of whether nicotine was GRAS or not, because what they said, and I think what...
No, you're mixing it up. GRAS only applies to food.
Okay, so...
there is a very complicated GRAS gray, in drugs, but the GRAS that I'm talking about for the moment...
is particularly with food.
Because in drugs, there's a risk-benefit, right? The question of what is a drug, in Brown and Williamson, the Supreme Court, 5 members of the court said that Congress intended tobacco not to be a drug. Now, I always thought, and I think Scalia actually, I heard this from one of his law clerks after he died. He voted against us, but I thought you start with the words of the statute. And the question is nicotine a drug? Not what Congress intended. That's legislative intent. You start with the actual words. If you're an originalist, it's the words that make a difference. But they didn't want to reach that result for whatever reason. And ultimately, Congress, passed.
Right, but that was not it.
But tobacco was hard.
Yes.
Tobacco, you can argue in a post-Chevron view, what is the definition of a drug, right? Did nicotine meet that definition of a drug? Did Congress intend to give? You can argue in a post-Chevron world, maybe regulation of tobacco would be difficult. In a post-Chevron world,
tobacco is more binary than carbohydrates. In other words, it's either tobacco is a yes.
Is there an expert consensus? Just answer one question.
Right. No, sure.
Is there an expert consensus that processed refined carbohydrates and ultra-processed foods are safe? Do you have that science? Is there that expert consensus? Does that exist today?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Okay, then there's no legal basis for these to be on the market.
Right. And you don't think that this is a big enough question that it's going to be dodged by FDA and other organizations and transferred back to Congress to make the decision, like they did after the tobacco?
So I understand. So fair to say we got the ball rolling here. We raised the question.
Absolutely.
Once you raise the question, once you open the door, we open the door, right? If you're the food industry, right? If let's say you're general counsel to some of the largest, ultra processed food companies in the world, you see this petition, right? This petition, I can tell you, I had this petition vetted by some of the best lawyers, food lawyers in the country. This is rock solid. So what advice are you going to give if you're general counsel to a food company, right, that makes ultra processed food, for which your entire, being, I mean, in some ways, this is, this is an existential threat to those companies that make ultra processed foods. What are you going to say to your CEO? What do you have to do now?
Well, that's exactly the question is, and we've got several examples. One of them is the way GLP-1s have been handled by pharma with their price point is they can double down on this and use legal means to do this.
Are you GRAS?
Am I GRAS?
You're not GRAS anymore.
No, we're not GRAS anymore.
If you're not GRAS, then you don't have a scientific, you don't have a regulatory way to stay on the market. Now, this administration may or may not act. I hope they do, right? But hold on a second. But ultimately, what are they going to need? I mean, they are going to need a way to stay on the market. I don't think this current Congress is just going to give them a pass, right? And allow, them to, with all the push, on making America healthy again and what the administration said, I don't think they're just going to, just say, hey, this stuff is GRAS. But there has to be a coming together and saying, hey, how did we get into this situation? And how do we get out of this? So in some ways, by opening the door here, yes, I would expect an administration to say this is no longer GRAS, but I think that then entails a rethinking of how we make food and how we sell food in this country.
Right, and that's exactly the point. So and this is something that's just become evident in the last week. Nina Teicholz, who I think brought this to my attention, and this was a leak of the MAHA position statement that it's coming up in a little bit. So assuming GRAS status is revoked and your petition is successful, what McGovern said in 1977, which was the start of the US dietary guidelines, after that, politicians don't have the luxury of actually looking at data. And in the latest version, the version that MAHA, the nutrition guidelines, that the MAHA strategy is coming out on chronic disease. It hasn't even been published. It's coming out in a few weeks' time. The entire science concept on low carb recommendations has been completely ignored in that statement.
Okay.
And this is about to become official policy in a few weeks. What strategies do you suggest we can have outside of this petition to the FDA to influence government, national, and possibly even global policy shifts on GRAS and the inclusion of UPFs?
All right. So let's just go through for a second. We can agree that ultra-processed foods, right, in some ways are contributing to this overconsumption. Fair?
Yes, very much so. And I want to explore that concept.
Wait a second.
I agree.
So there's ultra-processed foods. Now, let me give you, I'm going to give you a number of different mechanisms, okay? And you tell me whether you think it's a driver of overconsumption or not, okay? And I got a list of that, all right? So we understand that what the industry has done is taken these relatively cheap ingredients, right? These core ingredients of flour, these flours, starches, sugars, and oils. And it's reformulated them into these concoctions that have no structure, right? High in processed refined carbohydrates, high in sweeteners. Now, let me give you the first one. In order to make this, to sell this processed foods, what did they have to do? Number one, they had to dial in palatability. They had to dial in hyperpalatability, right? So you had to have fat and sugar, fat and salt, fat, sugar in salt. And we know that there's multiple mechanisms, right? There's hedonic mechanisms, there's homeostatic mechanisms. They all are play. Feeding is complicated. So the first question is palatability a driver of overconsumption?
There's no question it is.
Okay. So what about disrupted satiety signals, right? So if you make this highly palatable, these ultra-processed foods, right? By definition, you're just taking these core ingredients, you're removing them, all the structure of the food, you're removing all the fiber from the food, right? So that in some ways, do you have, this highly palatable food, do you think that it blunts satiety cues, right?
It does. Biologically, it does, yes. Or It doesn't activate satiety cues.
Right. So in some ways, what's fascinating to me, you have one industry, right, the food industry, making billions of dollars, taking away satiety, and then you have the GLP-1 industry giving us back satiety.
Correct.
Go figure. right? There's something wrong with that picture. All right, so we have two mechanisms. We have hyperpalatability, we have disrupted satiety signals. What about energy density? If you're making these ultra-formulated foods, right, what are you, when you're packing it in, right, in order to be shelf stable, you're taking out the hydration, right? You're packing in energy density in these processed refined carbohydrates. I mean, and you're making this stuff energy dense. Fair?
Energy dense and hyperabsorbable as well. So the glycemic index is also
I'm getting into it. So we have hyperpalatability, we have disrupted satiety signals, we have high energy density. What about a lack of fiber? In this ultra processed foods.
Yeah, I will dispute that because we see a lot of carnivore folks who eat no fiber. So the fiber side, I'm not.
So if you take the structure out of minimally processed foods and you just concentrate the refined sweeteners, the refined flours and starches, the oils, and you don't think that you have a lack of fiber in this ultra.
I would put a lack of fiber, with my experience in the carnivore space, as low on the totem pole as.
What about rapid nutrient absorption?
Well, let's go to one that's at the top of the list, which is the hedonistic eyeball visualization of the packaging of these things.
So marketing and environmental cues.
No question. I mean, they market the heck out of this stuff.
What about availability 24/7?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No seasonal variation.
What about rapid nutrient absorption?
Absolutely. That's that.
What's the effect on insulin response?
Of course, you're getting a massive insulin response and resistance as your safeguard within the system.
What about reduced hepatic insulin clearance if you overload with carbohydrates?
Of course.
All right. So what we have is these refined processed carbohydrates causing this overconsumption. We know that people are consuming more calories. And we have, due to hyperpalatability, disrupted satiety signals, high energy density, rapid nutrient absorption, exaggerated glycemic and insulin responses, reduced hepatic insulin clearance, frequent grazing, right, because of the availability, and marketing and environmental cues, right?
Yeah, so and a breakdown of normal homeostatic regulation.
So here's my question.
Yes.
Is this stuff based on all the mechanism that I just gave you and all that harm, right, and you see all that metabolic harm, that is occurring with this visceral adiposity that we started off, is this stuff GRAS?
No, of course it isn't, but it's not just the substance, the biology of the substance. And I think if you look at the title of your book, it talks about drugs and dopamine. That isn't food related. That is hedonistic. The title of your book is about psychology, not about nutrition. And
the human brain, let's see if we agree, the human brain evolved to deal with scarcity, not abundance. Fair?
Agreed.
Much of human history, there was no sense of no guarantee where the next meal would come from. So our biologic systems were designed to seek out the sweetest and most energy dense foods. Fair?
Correct. And also in eras of odd abundance, no harm happened, but we have no regulatory mechanism in an era of unprecedented continuous abundance. So there's no safeguard.
So we're wired to focus on that most salient stimuli. So that's all that cue induced want.
Yes.
Right? And at the end of the day, right? To me, we did the investigation into tobacco. I had to learn everything about, and the classic test for addiction is whether animals will press a lever, whether they will self-administer, right? Well, they will work for the food. And my friends at NIDA always had positive controls. They had sweetener there and sucrose there. And I said, well, why is that driving the self-administration? They never really focused on that. They were always focused on the drug side. But to me, both these highly palatable foods, these ultra formulated foods, and as well as nicotine, can change how we feel, right? Both can induce this cue-induced wanting, this craving. And what I didn't get, right? So I would lose the weight. I thought I was done over my lifetime. I gained the weight, I'd lose the weight. I would, and when I lost the weight, I thought I was done. And I'd always gain it back. I didn't realize that regain was in essence, relapse. I think that, look, we tended to think that addiction was, and this is, in the book, addiction is not we tend to think it's about the weak, it's about the downtrodden, right? And in fact, I think we have to change how we view addiction. That addiction, in essence, it's part of all of us, right? I mean, we are all wired. I mean, some of us, it may be food. Some of us, it may be, I mean, my sense is if I grew up 3 decades earlier, I would have been a smoker. I watch how I eat
Right.
throughout the
So
day.
it's vulnerability to addictive behavior that is a human need for endorphin or emotion management.
But addictive behavior is part. And you taught me this, right? I mean, it's these sort of little bumps through the day, right? These little perturbations through the day, right? I want to change how I feel when I'm bored, right? I mean, it's 10 o'clock at night and I got to work another 3-4 hours and I'm tired and I want to get some energy. And all of a sudden, this thought comes into my mind, this cue, should I go down to the refrigerator? Should I not? But throughout the day, when I watch myself eat, and I really was eating to change how I feel. Mm-hmm. I was grazing, and my guess is you watch somebody who smokes, they smoke. They picked up a cigarette to change how they feel.
Yeah, I've got this on my coffee cup, which is a snack is always an emotional event. So what we're doing is
but that's part of all of us.
Correct.
And I can't, yes, you can go tell me, do something different, go take a walk. Go lift weights, go take but the fact is, when I was studying, when I had to work, we all, in med school, to be able to get all the writing done and studying done, right? To be able to sit there, I would just, if I had food there, I could get another 2-3 hours.
So let me ask you this question along those lines. Would you agree that the regulation and the availability, the cheap availability of nicotine, when society turned against nicotine and it was less available, more expensive, did that contribute to a decrease in smoking?
Sure.
And you're looking for with your ultra-processed food.
So what did we do? At the turn of the previous century, right? Who smoked at the turn of the previous century? It was men. What did the industry do, right? They hired the psychoanalyst A.A. Brill to associate smoking with sexiness, adventures, the cowboy, the march down Fifth Avenue for emancipation. What they did is they made that addictive product, they made it positively valenced. What did we do? What did it take us 100 years to, in essence, do? We didn't change the cigarette. We had this critical perceptual shift. If something is addictive, it can change how I feel. And, it's going to make me feel better. And I go, I want it. I need it. I can't live without it. That's positively valenced. There's nothing that's going to stop me because, those cues are going to pop into my head, those thoughts of wanting, right? That's craving. That's a very powerful attention gating mechanism. But what we did is we changed the valence of tobacco from positively valenced to negatively valenced. And I think, look, does the administration need to declare these substances that they're no longer good? Absolutely. Do they need to take policy action? Absolutely. Right? But at the end of the day, we need to look at these processed refined carbohydrates. And look at them and go, that's not what I want. Right? That's not going to make me feel. Not only that, that's killing me. That's getting into my liver. That's why I started, right, with the visceral adiposity. That's getting into my liver. That's getting into my heart. That's going to cause heart failure, right? We're not very good at long-term, rewards compared to short-term rewards and that discounting, right? But I will tell you the amount of damage that I am seeing and that you're seeing, right? Look, something's. If you came down from another planet and you saw one industry making billions of dollars that make us sick, and that are filling up our livers with this visceral adiposity, right? In our hearts and in our pancreas and throwing our bodies into metabolic disruption. And now you have another industry making billions of dollars to treat that. You'd go, hey, something's wrong with that picture. Let's deal with the root cause, right? And that's what we did. And I will tell you, as you know, and I hope you are, I hope you can smile and take a bow, because you notice in the book, I talk about a group of you, not just you, right, but some of your colleagues also, who've spent your career sort of at the edge of mainstream, but you said, look, something's wrong about the food we're eating, right? There's that food, right? That is doing things to our brain and to our biology, and that is causing enormous harm, right? And I think much of mainstream medicine didn't get that, right?
Well,
So my sense is take a bow, right? I mean, I'm sure that you and I mean, there are aspects, right? I mean, are carbohydrates the only part, but there are sure big, I mean, but these processed refined carbohydrates, I mean, in this industrial processing, when we took, we made it, put it on every corner, made it available 24/7. I mean, it's driving this metabolic harm that I think our colleagues now are just in medicine are just waking up to.
Well, I think, you mentioned the four legs of the stool, but if you take away the carbohydrates and you just
the sweeteners and the flours and the starches,
the sweetness, so maybe two legs. The other two, the seed oils or the oils and the salt, nobody's going to go and seek those. So it's the all three. But here's a question for you. I'm going to ask you to go back a little bit to your pediatrician days. I understand the industrial pressure to produce and manufacture and market and sell these foods. But have we as families and parents not also, and maybe as medical professionals, not adequately educated our parents with the critical importance of helping their children develop diverse emotion management strategies? Have we not failed?
So hold the guilt for a second, right? So sorry to be, harsh. I know. Look,
yeah,
this is a scary world you're raising kids in, right? There's only, I mean, just to be able to put a house, right? I mean, to put, shelter and food on the table. I mean, what it takes for families to do that, right? I mean, we should not have a world where the burden is, I mean, sure, you want to protect your kids, but we had very strong food and drug laws that were enacted 100 years ago. And it's time that we start enforcing those so parents don't have to do that themselves, right? I mean, sure, of course you're right. I'm just reacting to the fact that there's only so much, there's only so many burdens you can carry, right? And I think that the reason we had a Food and Drug Administration in the nation's food laws was exactly reasonable certainty of no harm. Right. And despite those laws, this stuff got on the market and no one asked the very basic question, right? What is this stuff going to do to our biology? What happens when you take all this processed refined carbohydrates?
Yeah.
What is this doing to the biology? Right. I mean, the industry, see, here's the difference. And I could be wrong on this. Right. And we'll see. My guess is because we led the investigation into the tobacco industry. And that industry had done all the science, right? And knew everything about nicotine and was highly sophisticated, right? And they had done imaging and EEG work and brain evoked potentials, right? They did all the neuropharmacology, and we found all those documents, right? And they knew, they had written long before I said it. We believe we are then in the nicotine delivery business, right? Mm-hmm. They knew that. We are in the business of delivering nicotine. They understood they were in the pharmacology. They did the science.
So that was intentional.
But my guess on the food world, they've had their head in the sand. They've not done the science. They've put this stuff on the market. This stuff is ultra processed. I mean, it's extrusion. I mean, it's refined. It's rapidly absorbed. We discussed hyperpalatability, disruptive satiety signals, increased energy density, rapid nutrient absorption, exaggerated glycemic and insulin response, marketing environmental cues. They did all that, right? And no one asked what they were doing. And my guess is
they've been complicit in ignoring that because they should.
So we did the food label, right? Where's you have anything with the food label on it, the nutrition facts, right?
I don't have it in front of me, but sure, I did. Yes, you did that. You were responsible.
So here's what we did. And that was viewed as iconic, and everybody it disclosed what was in the food. What it didn't do was it didn't explain what the effects of what's on that label is on the body. Right? And no one asked those questions. When the industry went and developed corn syrups, corn solids, glucose syrups, dextrose, invert sugar, xylose, maltose, high fructose corn syrups, when it started subjecting things to extrusion technology, when it started using, all these flours and starches and sweeteners with these emulsifying mechanisms, no one asked, what's the effect on nutrient absorption? What's the effect on palatability? What's the effect on satiety signals? How do we miss it?
Well, so a question, obviously you having been a former commissioner, having dealt with tobacco, your knowledge and your strategic approach to this is enormous, because one of the concerns I have with the FDA as a physician and as a small-time physician is that the FDA these days, and this is more broad about the FDA, typically expects production of conclusive, expensive, large-scale trials to shift policy.
For drugs.
But this.
No. But hold on a second. Hold on a second. Who has the burden? Go back to the food laws. Okay. Go back to the food laws. Who has the burden to show safety under the food laws?
Well, the manufacturers probably.
Okay. And what do they have to show?
Well, they have to show, as you said, the GRAS.
They have to show reasonable certainty of no harm, right? And you can't be GRAS if there's not an expert consensus. Right, with the list of hyperpalatability, disrupted satiety signals, high energy density, exaggerated glycemic and insulin responses, you can't have an expert consensus. This stuff is because it's not, right?
But did the FDA not turn a blind eye? Does it not have certain ulterior motives? I know it's a sensitive question. You were the commissioner, but
look, we dealt with tobacco. Fair, we took on tobacco.
Yes, correct.
Right. We took HIV. HIV was a death sentence, right? And HIV became a disease you could live with, right? We got those drugs developed in the matter of months, right? I co-led 30 years later. I was at FDA under Bush and Clinton. I went back to co-lead Operation Warp Speed, right? But whatever you disagree on policy, whatever. Right.
But FDA has approved GLP-1s they've even chosen names for the same drug that coincide with particular disease. So you've got semaglutide, which is branded under Wegovy for one indication, diabetes, and under Ozempic for obesity.
So let's say if you and I agree. How do those drugs work?
Those drugs are incretin agonists. They work at multiple levels. One of the primary things they do is increase insulin secretion and block or decrease glucagon. They also work centrally in the basal ganglia to support.
What's their primary mechanism?
Their primary mechanism is hormonal translation.
Right. But if you look, right, I think that their primary mechanism, from everything I have studied, right, is they delay gastric emptying. Okay?
That's a piece of it, but in response to...
No. So in essence, right, there's no magic here. They affect the area postrema. They affect the NTS. This gut-brain axis, right? But you and I agree there's an hedonic circuit, right?
Absolutely, of course.
Now there's also an aversive circuit.
Yes.
If you ingested poisons, if you and I have the flu, right, what's going to happen to our GI tract?
Well, it's going to get inflamed.
And what's going to happen?
There's antigen that is your immune system is reacting to.
But food's going to stay in my stomach longer.
Of course. There's a GLP-1 activity.
And how is that going to make me feel?
Well, it makes you feel terrible, of course.
Right. So what do these drugs do? What these drugs do? I think the industry has not been fully, transparent. I think these drugs take people. And I think this is their greatness. I think they take them to the edge of nausea. Right.
I would agree at high dose. Absolutely. Yes.
No. And I think what people do is that they look, if food's going to stay in my stomach longer, what am I not going to want to do? I'm not going to want to put more food in my stomach because I'm going to feel lousy. Correct. So I think people condition themselves, right? Because, again, everybody is different. I am humbled by the variability of the response, right? But I look at delayed gastric emptying, and I see that as a key mechanism. And that delayed gastric emptying also does what? It slows down the glucose absorption.
Right. It flattens that curve. Yes.
Right. And in some ways, what you see is the low carbohydrate diet, right, and GLP-1s both, I think, decrease. That insulin glycemic response in such a way. In fact, it doesn't increase I mean, if you ask Arnie Astrup and Jans Holst, these drugs really, I mean, if you look at people, their insulin and glucose levels don't go up on the GLP-1
It's
drug.
insulins do. I can tell you categorically, working in the field, insulin levels go up, glucagon comes down.
No. But if you look, right, the glucose levels come down,
Yes.
right? The C-reactive proteins
Protein
come
comes down.
down, and if you look in the clinical trials, go back and look at the insulin levels, right? Because you will see that because of that delayed gastric emptying, these really are not insulin mimetics. I mean, as go back and look at Arnie Astrup's work and Jans
But
Holst.
I can tell you categorically from the work I do every day, seeing tens of thousands of people's blood work on a regular basis, that insulin levels do go up. And I've got before and after, and I track them. So
Not in the clinical. You and I go back and we'll look at the clinical trials. I mean, and see it, because if you have delayed gastric emptying and you have decreased absorption, right? That rapid rate of absorption, right, is going to maybe yes, you can affect the pancreas, but that delayed gastric emptying is going to slow down that absorption and slow down those spikes.
I would agree with that with the upper part. However, the primary reason we use, or I certainly use in practice, the GLP-1s is particularly to increase insulin release. And
So I actually think, again, we may disagree. I think the
yeah.
primary mechanism is this delayed gastric emptying.
There's no question it's a huge contributor. But also a lot of our patients, and this is what I focus on, is changing their diet. So if they're on a ultra low carbohydrate diet, avoiding the ultra processed foods, increasing their animal product consumption, you to a certain extent negate that effect. And then you have to recruit and re-release the insulin, but also block glucagon, because a lot of these patients have paradoxic glucagon.
So here's where, look, one of the hardest questions for me that I have not been able to figure out, and I've studied this for a decade, right, is over the last 2-3 decades, hyperinsulinemia has doubled in this country.
Yes.
Okay? And what I can't figure out is which comes first. Okay, does the visceral adiposity come first, or the hyperinsulinemia comes first? My sense is in those of us who are vulnerable to insulin resistance, right? I think that adding these processed refined carbohydrates are adding fuel to this fire. I can't tell you, right, exactly which comes first. I mean, I have evidence both ways, right? But there's an epidemic of hyperinsulinemia, and in those people who are insulin resistant, these processed refined carbohydrates, everything about the reason why you are right to me is that because the majority of us are vulnerable and insulin resistant, and adding these processed carbs are just adding fuel to the fire. And that's why you see going on a low carb diet, you can clean out the liver of that visceral adiposity. Now, could you also do it if you reduce calories, right?
It has an influence, but it's not, it doesn't correct the problem completely. The more sophisticated thing that we've seen in clinical practice is there's a bimodal distribution. There are some people genetically who can produce massive amounts of insulin, which drives the obesogenic picture. There are other people that can produce a moderate amount of insulin in response to the high carbohydrate consumption, but their insulin production is capped. And when they cannot clear their blood sugar with high insulin, their blood sugar rises and they tend to be diabesogenic. So they get diabetes easily with cardiovascular disease. The interesting thing is when your insulin protective mechanism fails or when it peaks, you can no longer produce fat and then your blood sugar starts to rise. So diabetes tends to start where obesity ends. And it's an interesting thing clinically that some people are very obese, like myself. We walk past a donut, we gain weight. Other people do the same thing. They don't gain the weight, but their blood sugars rise.
But I think you and I mean, the one thing that sort of this Lancet commission that looked at, clinical obesity and only defined it as when symptoms started to occur, you and I would both agree, I mean, that trajectory, right? I mean, gets laid out much earlier in life.
Hi, folks. Carb Addiction Doc here. And Ketone IQ has recently come out with a product. It's their regular Ketone IQ, ketone supplement, exogenous ketone. But this one contains caffeine, okay? And I've been playing around with it.
I do get a boost. I've had some people just not like the caffeine. It gets their heart racing too much. I found value to this. However, here's what intrigued me. This Ketone IQ is made from a green tea extract, and the caffeine comes from green tea. And I didn't understand that. And I went to look at some of the green teas. I drink mostly rooibos tea, but I looked at some of my green teas. And the majority of my green teas that I have in my home contain a sizable amount of caffeine. So be very cautious. Look at the green tea you're drinking, especially if you're drinking it between dinner and bedtime, when I try not to drink caffeine. Make sure that there is no caffeine there. Don't be fooled, and know the product, because this Ketone IQ was a moment for me. Now, the green tea Ketone IQ is something I use from time to time in the morning. I've been playing around with it as a surrogate for my first cup of coffee, particularly on run days for me. And I've noticed that it's a really, really cool thing to run on early in the morning. There's no way I'm going to take this in the evening. But look into the green tea. I didn't know that. I know other teas do. But check out your green tea and make sure it isn't laced with caffeine.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree, but there's a point where obesity ends and diabetes begins, and it's a crossover, and it's based on insulin resistance. Now,
but again, I mean, I even the word obesity, right?
Or weight gain. Let's use the word weight gain.
So, but again, it's that weight gain in those visceral organs with the metabolic consequences.
Peripheral weight gain is driven by insulin. When that system fails, you start to get it in the central part. But the interesting thing about it is the observation is central or organ-based fat accumulation. The hormonal driving force behind that is more important than the fat itself. The fat is active, but the hormonal shift.
You and I both agree that you got to get fat out of places it doesn't belong in those.
I agree, but it's shifting the hormones rather than the caloric deficit.
I mean, once you're in that state, right, I mean, both calories and those hormones are adding fuel to the fire.
The combination, correct.
Correct. I mean, and I think for many people who are insulin resistant, and I actually think, and I write this in the book, I think one of the fallacies of these drugs is that the industry expects people to be on these drugs for a lifetime.
Correct. But that's not a fallacy. That is a sales pitch. That's business. It's not science.
Well, but to their credit, the fact is, look, you can't expect a drug to work when you're not taking it. I mean,
correct, maybe, but you can become resistant to any drug.
Right. So here's why what you do is so important. I mean, we can agree that these GLP-1 drugs are important tools.
Yes, very much so. I would tell you this: in my lifetime, they are the single most important advance by pharma of any drugs.
Are they the be all and end all?
No, of course not. They're
so here's the reality.
Yes.
The average person in this country is on these drugs for 8-9 months.
Correct.
Right? What are you going to do? I mean, and that's great. They're on 8-9 months. They can lose, significant amount of weight. They can reduce that metabolic harm, right? I mean, I'm all in favor of it. What are you going to do after that 8-9 months?
Well, that's exactly the point is if you're outsourcing to the drug as an exclusive weapon, you're going to fail.
Got it. So what do you got to do?
You've got to address the behavioral side behind it, which you've successfully done in your own life. And the way
that was what the book was about, right?
Correct, exactly right. If you're going to use Chantix, you don't stay on Chantix for the rest of your life. You use it as an accelerant and as a protective mechanism.
Because underlying this is what? I mean, these are the addictive circuits, right? And these addictive circuits don't go away.
That's what you spoke about. And in fact, I had a question about that, is rewiring that addictive circuit. But the problem is that the majority of practitioners write a prescription and off you go and be skinny. They don't give you...
The majority of practitioners, let's face it, come on. I mean, really have not understood, right, what to do here.
Oh, I agree completely, but isn't that...
I mean, for decades, right? Is it fair to say American medicine has been asleep at this switch when it comes to this metabolic harm?
I'm going to shift your focus, and I want you to...
No. But to answer that.
But I want to ask you a specific question, and I'm going to ask you...
No, but I get to answer. Has American medicine been asleep at the switch I mean,
I don't think that they've been asleep. I think there was a shift in the way we deal with healthcare. You were dean, I don't know what the years were, but you were dean at Yale
yes, sir.
and you were probably there in the 80s and 90s. I was doing my PhD in Toronto in
I was actually dean in more in the late 90s and 2000.
Okay, so in the middle of the 90s, there was an intentional shift at a university level to shift away from biochemistry and physiologic teaching toward epidemiology. And there was a
Or toward molecular biology, to basic
toward
science.
molecular biology, but heavily toward outcome metrics epidemiology. And the problem with epidemiology at best is that it is associations. And when we, as you said, when we mistake associations for causality, there's huge problems. And we've forgotten about physiologic mechanisms. And
I mean, so we can agree that ultra processed foods, right, these refined processed carbohydrates are contributing to overconsumption, correct?
there's no question, but
But there's still a lot of questions about what the exact mechanism is.
exactly. And we're not spending enough time looking at the physiology and the pathophysiology of how they work. And for example,
I actually think, I mean, if this administration wants to do anything, look, I'm very concerned about where we're the investment in biomedical. I mean, I'm very concerned about where they are in vaccines. You understand, I think we saved, millions of lives. Leave that aside. I'm very concerned about the attack on biomedical research.
I agree with that.
But the one thing we should do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there needs to be a national lab system set up to answer those physiology questions.
Yes,
right?
no question.
And this administration, look, if it doesn't want to do it through the NIH, I mean, create a national lab. There are other makers. We have to get those answers because we're not going to be able to afford healthcare for the rate of heart failure, diabetes, stroke that this metabolic harm is going to cause. We can't afford this as a country going forward.
But have we not at a medical school level and at a medical infrastructure level created a cognitive dissonance where we are looking at outcome metrics rather than...
Hold it. You know as well as I do that research follows the money. So if you fund it, I mean, I'm sorry for being that crass.
No, I agree that we need the money to be infused.
So you have to have the funding in place, and you have to also, you have to not beat up on these academics. We have to get young people to want to enter these careers. I mean, look, my concern is that many of these postdocs and graduate students, they grew, they had to endure COVID. They couldn't go into the labs. They moved into other things. They now look at the NIH budget and that's cut and they go into other things. We're going to lose a generation, right, of very talented individuals because those physiology questions which you just posed are absolutely essential to get the answer.
I agree completely. And here's what, you are a product of Harvard Medical School. Harvard Medical School, we can argue this back and forth, but I would say that it is probably the most influential of any healthcare organization.
Look, I was dean at SF. I was dean at Yale.
Yes, Yale.
Those are not small potatoes.
I agree. But
fair.
The place I'm going to, one of the biggest influences on healthcare policy is a Harvard-based organization called the Chan Public School of Health. And if you look at the biased support, the financial support from pharma, from industry of that organization, and some of the epidemiologic garbage that's coming out of there.
But to be fair, okay, because I know, the Frank Hughes and Walter Wills, they got it on ultra processed foods, right?
Well, but to demonize red meat as being more.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. None of us get everything right in life. Fair?
Well, except I'm saying this is intentional. To call Lucky Charms cereals healthier than eggs is problematic. That's Walter Willett. That's problematic.
Wait. Do me a favor.
Yes.
Just call him up, get him on the phone. Let's ask him if he really agrees with that statement.
But that's what they've published. And the new.
Look, you and I agree, right? I had eggs for breakfast this morning.
Yes.
I did have Lucky Charm.
Of course.
Right.
Of course.
Right. I think these processed refined carbohydrates. Look, my goal, is in this petition what I was struck. Okay, because it's very simple. In some ways, it took me. I had to go to law school. I had to take on tobacco. I had to run FDA. I had to write 3 books, right? I mean, I had conversations with you, right? It couldn't be easier. It's asked a very simple question. Are these processed refined carbohydrates GRAS under the nation's food laws? If not, they don't belong on the market. And what I found and what I need is whether it's Gary Taubes or Nina or Walter Willett, right, or you, I think we can, or Kevin Hall or David Ludwig. What I've heard from my colleagues, they can speak for themselves, is they all agree. When I put the petition out there, they went, that makes sense.
All the sense in the world.
So do me a favor, okay? There's a lot of nutrition we don't agree on.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff that's complicated. And there's been a lot of, what's the right way to say it? Bad feelings?
No, I think there's...
But honestly, I mean, there are these camps.
Right.
Look, there's camps. For a second, just let's hold it. Can we agree? Can we all agree? Can I get David Ludwig and Kevin Hall and Walter Will and you, right? And Gary, I mean, and can I get everyone to say, hey, we can agree that processed refined carbohydrates, there's not an expert consensus, and it's doing damage.
Well, that is where the epiphany of your strategy, this petition, because you're absolutely right. What it does is, despite our disparity, it drives consensus around this very topic. And it was very salient of you. We can argue about salt, we can argue about seed oils. Right. I don't think there's anybody in the knowledge or even with some knowledge who is going to disagree with this petition. The question, though, are the political...
So then we need to get it done.
Well, are the political and the industrial forces and the money, you keep talking about money, I agree, money is a big problem. Are they sufficient? For example, in the Maha...
I think, look, Secretary Kennedy and I have major disagreements when it comes to vaccines. Fair?
Yes, I agree.
We have major disagreements when it comes to biomedical research and, right?
Yes.
I mean, I have major disagreements on what they're doing to FDA. The 20% reduction in staff, I don't get that. You understand? Leave that all aside.
Yes.
There is an incredible opportunity to affect the health of this nation.
Absolutely. And we've all got consensus about that. But
Right.
they've already been influenced.
Hold it. Give them a chance. Let's see if it... Look, I know there are reports, but what I said when the leaked copy came out, right? Actions speak louder than what's in the report, okay?
Okay.
Let's see if they take action. Because, look, if they don't take action, somebody else will. Tobacco took us decades, right? I think we have a regulatory hook. I think there is a sound legal hook that should wake up the food industry to realize, right, that there is not a legal basis for them to continue to sell what they're selling.
Yes.
Right. And we have to find solutions to this because it involves our kids. It starts early on and it's causing, well, the way we started, enormous metabolic harm.
Right. And also they're promoting it, as you said with GRAS, as a non-harmful. They don't have to say it's good for you, but they're promoting as being non-harmful. And that is a travesty because we all know that it does cause harm. So the question for you is, if you were, and I don't know if you are, you can answer this question. If you were invited to be chief medical officer again in this current White House, what internal conversations would you have with those that can shift policy?
So I would, if I were the secretary.
If you were the secretary or you were
if I were the secretary, I would set a determination that these substances, just based on the science, these substances can no longer be viewed as GRAS. I would give the industry a defined period of time to submit the science to show whether, in fact, there's reasonable certainty of no harm. I would begin the process, just as we did with tobacco, to begin the hearings, right? Let the industry come in, let them talk about how they can reformulate food, how they can rethink foods. I mean, how we can get, a food supply where Americans can thrive and not be injurious.
Let me be a little bit more specific. In every 5 years, the US dietary guidelines come out that influence public policy toward nutrition. And in 2020, they included children under the age of 2, including pregnant women. The next one is due to be published October of 2025.
So I did an op-ed. I mean, I don't know if you have it,
The Wall Street Journal one.
Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
And I said that the dietary guidelines need to be written in a way that they reflect the state of the American body. And currently only 12.2% of the Americans are metabolically healthy when you look at waist circumference, blood pressure, blood lipids, and basic parameters. We have an epidemic of hyperinsulinemia, and we can't continue to add these processed refined carbohydrates into a body that is insulin resistant because it's killing us, right? And I think the dietary guidelines can't be written, right, for the 12% of the Americans, I mean, who may be now, I mean, they are the exception, right? And I think we have to recognize that these processed refined carbohydrates are doing us real harm. And look, the culprit, right? The culprit is the diet, right?
So let me ask you this question, because until today, if you ask any practitioner or the majority of practitioners out there, they are going to blame cholesterol, LDL, and fat in our diet, and they are going to prove.
So here's what I would like to do.
Yes.
Okay? And you and I may disagree a little on this. Okay. I think we can reclaim our health.
Yes.
Okay. I think we need to control blood pressure better. Okay. I think we need to decrease visceral adiposity. Okay. And until somebody can prove it elsewhere, I think that one of the elements of getting LDL-C down, it's not perfect, right? But along with the controlling blood pressure, decreasing visceral adiposity, right? Getting LDL, I mean, we have the clinical trial data, right? Now it's unclear whether those are surrogates. I think some of my friends increasingly, you talk to Peter Libby, some of the great cardiologists, I mean, they are increasingly, they were pretty convinced that LDL-C was causal, was in the causal chain. Today, they're thinking hypertriglyceridemia is in the causal chain. So that is evolving. But we can, by getting, let's see, abnormal lipid patterns, visceral adiposity, blood pressure, we could basically wipe out atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, in a very significant way.
But should we not then therapeutically think about shifting away from statins toward GLP-1s that, while not a panacea, are actually doing what you just suggested, whereas the statins...
So let me give you, I noticed this. If you look at the White House's medical records, they put Trump had a LDL-C about 140, like that, right? Today they got his LDL-C down to, I think, 60 or 70. They put him on two. What? They just put him on two. They put him on ezetimibe and rosuvastatin. They put him on intensive lipid lowering therapy, right? I think that, again, I have three things. I want to correct abnormal lipid patterns, whether it's hypertriglyceridemia or LDL. I want to get visceral fat down.
Yes.
Right? I want to get blood pressure down. If we do those three things, we can dramatically, we talk about longevity, right? What's longevity, right? Longevity is prevention.
Absence of harm.
Right. But we talk about all this longevity. That's the cool word, right? Give me those three things. Lower blood pressure, reduce abnormal lipid patterns. Again, hypertriglyceridemia, LDL, reduce visceral adiposity, right? Change the American diet, right? There's an enormous opportunity, and I hope this administration does it.
Well, the sexy word now is something called health span. It's not just lifespan.
But it is, this visceral adiposity, I think.
There's no question. I agree completely with you. And the difference in thinking, and is certainly brought out in your book, is that visceral adiposity is internally manufactured from sugar, not externally consumed from fat in our diet. But that requires a massive mental shift that has been going in the opposite direction for the last 50 years. The narrative...
But it's this whole way. Look, what the food industry did was it created this alternate universe of substances, right? It pushed food aside and took these cheap ingredients, right? These four legs of the stool. And out of those those cheap ingredients, it made thousands of products, right? That are not food. And in those products, right, are these, refined sweetness, these refined flours and starches, these fats and oils, the salt, right? And as a package, right, we see the harm.
Yes.
Right? And for the moment, what we need to do is we need to recognize it again. I think there are several messages. One, we can all agree these processed refined carbohydrates are killing us.
Yes.
Yeah? And we got to get them out of the food supply, right? And that's no small task, right? That is no small task. The other thing is we have to be able to give people who have struggled with their weight, who have this visceral adiposity, right? We got to give them the tools. GLP-1s are an enormous breakthrough, but they're not a panacea.
I agree. Yes.
Right? They have real adverse events. You and I can discuss exactly their mechanism, but you can't do it alone, right? The docs writing for GLP-1s and say, go forth and not do anything else. I mean, what does your team take? What did you learn to do in bariatric surgery that the rest of us have to emulate with these GLP-1s? You put together teams, right? Because you can't ask patients to do it themselves.
Correct.
It's just too hard, right? So what do you have? They have you, right? You have a nutritionist?
Well, the first person we have is actually a psychologist, which goes along with the theme of your book. We have a dietitian and nutritionist, and then we have coaches that help people behaviorally to make the transformation.
So what we need, right? And I could achieve. Look, you can get up there. I mean, if I have bariatric surgery, how many calories a day am I going to consume?
Well, you're down to 300-400.
Right.
I want to understand this. I've changed. I'm no longer a bariatric surgeon because of GLP-1s. I'm a metabolic health specialist because of.
So surgery got us down to maybe 400, 500, 600 calories. GLP-1s can get us down to 600, 700, 800 calories. There's not a lot of difference.
No, there's not.
But what is key, and the reason I wrote this book, right, is we have to give people the tools, and they have to recognize that there's not a one and done.
Well, let me ask you about GLP-1s then. Why, number one, in this country, are the prices ridiculously high, and why are
So here's what happened.
These crazy gatekeepers? Should it not be publicly available? Should it not be over the counter? Like it is in Mexico?
So hold on a second. Let's see if you and I can agree that there are some serious adverse events, right?
Correct.
They're rare.
No, but there's a caveat to that. The majority of people on GLP-1s are backdooring them. They're buying them on the black market.
So let's separate this out.
Okay.
First of all, this can delay gastric emptying. I mean, you and I have seen that something as simple as constipation, delaying gastric emptying, can result in perforation, collective septicemia, and I've seen people die.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right? So these drugs are not just innocuous.
Oh, no.
And you need good care, right? If you're going to take this drug and you're going to be on 600 calories, right, a day, you need to be followed because you're going to get dehydrated, right?
Well, not only that, even if you negate the negative, the benefit is enormous when you have an ancillary program that helps you to change, where we change the dietary mentality.
So you need that approach. You need that approach. But let's talk about the economics of this.
Yes.
So only in this country, go figure. I mean, no doubt. Look, these are sterile, injectable, fill finish pens. I mean, they have to be done, made well, etc.
Well, the compounding.
There was a lot of research, but the industry put these on I mean, they were very expensive, over $1,000, right? And then you have, because of this crazy, I'll call it a loophole, but it's part of the law, right? I mean, when there was a shortage, right, you had drugs the API being made abroad in China. No one knows exactly where it comes from. They're all these middlemen. And these drugs started becoming on the market.
Yes.
$200, right? I mean, and no one could assure where that was coming from or what the safety of that stuff was. No one knew that, right? But what it took, and here's the crazy part. So in order to get the prices down, we had in this country to put on the market, gray market, in essence, drugs, right? Whose safety was not established, in order to get the companies finally now are saying, okay, I'll take it down. But here's the problem.
Even still, they haven't brought it down.
But here's the problem, okay?
Yeah.
And here's even further crazy. But the compounded drugs brought this drug down. I can go Lilly Direct or Novo Direct. I can get these drugs. If I'm willing to pay out of pocket, I could now pay. I mean, I carry 3 insurances.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, I have 3 medical insurances. None of them paid for
Well, we've got the other problems, the prior authorization roadblock.
But before you get to that, here's the problem. Lilly and Novo took these drugs down to $500-$600 if you pay cash.
Yes.
Okay. If you're an employer, right, you can't afford $1,000, right? But there's a lot of pressure on you. Maybe you'll contribute $200-$300. What I don't get today, okay, here's the way this needs to work. My employer should be willing to chip in $200-$300, right? Lilly should be able to sell this drug. Let's say it sells at $400-$500. I pay what they pay in the UK. I add maybe $150 a month myself. My employer does $200-$300 a month, and Lilly gets $400 or $500. That's the way it should work.
Yes.
The problem with these contracts and these PBMs is that an employer can contribute. The rebate right now is about $300, right? So it's off $1,000. They're expecting employers to pay $700-$800, right? And that's just too much.
But there's the third loophole. Novo Nordisk has just signed a darn contract with Weight Watchers to sell these drugs at a cheap effect. They had a contract with Hims.com and hers.
But they're not willing right now. If you have an employer,
yeah,
I mean, and I have paid for three health insurances. Should they pay for something for these drugs?
They should.
Right. Should they have to pay $1,000 a month?
Right. But
so they should be able to contribute something. But these contracts, somebody's holding up. Now, I don't know whether it's Lilly and Novo who are deliberately not, they want, if the employer is to hold them up for $700-$800, a month, whether they're doing that. But these drugs should be available for $500. The employer should be able to contribute $200-$300. I should be able to have some copay.
But shouldn't the insurer also, the large insurance companies also negotiate with pharma rather than roadblocking patients from getting the drugs by imposing prior authorizations?
Look, I'll make you a deal, okay? Do me a favor, run for president of the United States in a very simple campaign.
I'm foreign born.
The only campaign I want is get rid of prior authorization.
Oh, okay. So the current government, the MAHA organization, has reduced 80% as of, I believe, next year. I'm not sure the exact date. Removed 80% of the ICD-10 codes from allowance for prior authorization. I'm not sure if the obesity and diabetes codes.
I will tell you, right? Whoever can get rid of prior authorization, right? We should vote for president.
Well, I believe that law was passed for 80%, but
no. Today,
yeah.
How much time is spent in a doctor's office, right? How much staff is used?
Yeah.
Prior authorization. Let's face it, right? It's only. It's hoops. It's just meant to deny people.
Yeah, it's passing the denial onto the practitioner. I refuse to do this.
How many board certifications? Let's make a deal.
I've got 2 board certifications.
If you're one board certified, we should trust you. We can review you maybe at the end of the year. Let's review you at the end of the year and see how you do. But let's trust you to prescribe this and stop this prior authorization. We got to get rid of it. And I don't understand why there's not enough political force to do that.
Well, that's the economics. The other thing also, and Donald Trump signed on the 4th of, and this is not about politics, it's just a fact. On the 4th of August, he sent a letter to the top 17 drug manufacturers called most favored nation status. And he asked by the end of September that they voluntarily reduce the price of their drugs to most favorites to the same price that they sell the same drugs.
Look, you can buy this drug in the UK. He's right. For $125 a month.
Canada's 140. Yeah.
All right. That should be that. But there's ways to get there. If people are right, let the employer contribute. Get rid of make it illegal for these PBM contracts to stand in the way. What happens is that these PBMs say to the drug manufacturers, you can't sell it to employers at $400 or $500 because if you do that, we're not going to carry your other drugs that you want, right? So we got to. We got to change that. Let the employer contribute some. I'm willing to let the patient contribute some. Let's make this accessible. And look, Otherwise, we're just discriminating against people who struggle with their weight.
Yeah, it becomes a wealth basis thing. And it currently is that, or it's an access point. But not only for these drugs, but for medications in general. We've gone through the whole insulin debacle. We now are dealing with thyroid issues where they won't cover some of the natural and the NP thyroids, but they'll cover the cheaper synthetics. So this is a continuous clinical battleground of, as you said, me as a physician deciding based on my board certification what's best for my patients and being roadblocked by a recipe.
And again, I think you should be willing to be reviewed and looked at. I mean, in retrospect, but this real time prior authorization has to stop.
Yes, completely agreed. So you do not believe that the GLP-1s should be over the counter?
Look, I want you as my doc. I want your behaviorist as my psychologist. I want your nutritionist. I want people to have care. I am concerned. I mean, medicines that are over the counter should be able to be self-administered, right, without that care. I think these are very powerful medicines. I think these are dangerous, right? I want to give people access to them, right? But I live in, look, I'm not happy with some of these telehealth services that just, do this, spend less than a minute on some forms in asynchronous care and just prescribing these drugs. And if the patient ends up with abdominal pain, go to the ER.
But then you're too afraid to say you're on these medications because you got them backdoor. And I see that frequently where patients are embarrassed or afraid to say they're taking these medications.
There should be no stigma.
Right.
There should be no shame to these medications. Right. I'm all in favor of providing access. Right. I mean, there are good telehealth services and there are those who are not good. Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think these are powerful medications. I think we still have to learn. Right. But I will tell you. Right. Have you seen patients who become dehydrated on that?
Over 60% of my patients are getting this in other ways other than by prescription from their doctor.
Right. And I think people, look, in the long run, I mean, if you're my doc, and I can't prove this, but right now, patients that are getting from this telehealth are on this for a few months and then they go off.
Yes.
There's something about understanding this is not about weight. This is about health span, right? That you can explain. If you're my doc, can you keep me on a regimen? Can you help get me there for the long term? Because I mean, nothing's going to work forever, right? So I'm going to be on the GLP-1s. They're going to work, but then I'm going to go off it. And then maybe I go on a low carb diet, right? Maybe I need to change here. I have to change certain behavioral things. I have to increase it. I need different tools at different points in life, right? And my sense is, look, I'm under no illusion, right, that we don't have enough docs, we don't have enough caregivers, right? But if you struggle with weight, right, and it's just very important that people avail themselves, of clinicians who are willing to help people. I don't think when you're dealing with an addiction, you can't do it yourself.
Oh, there's no question. And I love the fact that you so openly use that phrase that I've been ostracized for using for such a long time. And the title of your book reflects that. Here's another question for you is the way the healthcare is currently set up, that more and more practitioners are employed physicians and the metrics they judge you by are not excellence of care, but following an algorithm of prescription and seeing X number of patients.
So look, I think I think some of this, right, to optimize blood pressure, right? Can you and I write the algorithm to optimize blood pressure?
I think that it's a reasonable algorithm.
Let's say and I understand we may disagree a little, but just even on getting LDL-C down, can we algorithmize? Whatever the right word is. Can we standardize how to do it? You don't have to be involved in every dose change.
Correct. No, absolutely.
Do you have to be involved in every time I go from 2.5 to 5 or it's 7.5? No. Every dose change on a GLP-1?
No.
Well, what do you have to be available for?
Well,
what do I need you for?
The availability, well, you use the word addiction. you can't help someone even to understand that they have not a nutrition problem, but a substance abuse problem in a 5-minute visit. You cannot lead with a prescription pad when you are dealing with diseases that ultimately we cause to ourselves. You can blame society, you can blame availability, but ultimately we choose to eat.
So I think where we need to go, right? I mean, the fact is, there's not enough docs, right? There's certainly not enough docs who understand this type of medicine. Fair. I mean, the fact is we're expensive by the nature, right? I mean, all our training, whatever. I mean, medical care is not cheap. I think we have to have the right combination of using technology when we can use technology, but use medical care, I mean, when we need medical care. And it's that combination that I very much strive to make sure people have access to.
Right. So in terms of your medical school administrative capacity, let's take you back a little bit. Is there not a paradigm shift that is necessary in medical school training, the product we're providing? Just like in policing, we are also now having to understand that there's mental health issues and policing issues, and the two are not best equipped. Is there not an excess of people being trained in terms of nutrition, dietitians, and should we not be more treating or training people in nutrition and addiction psychology? Should that not be a priority as we shift toward dealing with screen time, nicotine, that 60% of high school kids in Florida vape regularly, and the carbohydrate or ultra-processed food epidemic that we're dealing with? Should there not be a shift in terms of who we're training?
I think by the very nature of your question, you said it very eloquently, but that requires a degree of understanding of what it means to be human, the biological and the neural pathways. And I think I think we have to open our eyes. We've been living in silos, right? The cardiologist over here, the nephrologist there, the psychologist here, the psychiatrist there, right? I mean, what I found, in writing, in writing this last book, somebody's very good at the food science up until, it gets in the mouth. Somebody's very good from the mouth to the absorption in the duodenum. Someone's very good on the absorption, into the bloodstream. Someone may be good, when it gets to the liver. But very few people have put this together. And how do we allow this to happen? How do we miss this, right? I mean, this is as big an epidemic as we've seen, right? I did a piece, one of the op-eds that I wrote is, the beer belly is no longer cool.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's visceral.
Well, it's called the dad bod now, which is cool.
But what is that? What is that dad bod?
Oh, it's metabolic dysfunction.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, how are we going to get that 50-year-old male, right, to want to get care? How do I get them into you so you can take care of them so that they don't develop heart failure or don't develop diabetes?
But also to get care before an event. A lot of my patients come and see me after their heart attack, after their stroke, after they have diabetes. You want to do this in a preventive way, a preemptive way, rather than in a therapeutic way.
Right. And so what do we need? I mean, there are not enough of you, of your colleagues. Right? We can't clone you. Right? But we have to figure out how we can have the system, right, to be able to make available to that 50-year-old male who's still, who's not showing any symptoms.
Right.
If you went to look at the amount of liver fat, it's there, right? You would see abnormal lipid patterns, right? You would see.
But haven't we normalized that? Haven't we normalized the dad bod? Haven't we normalized fatty liver?
We normalized tobacco.
Right.
Right. We normalized ultra processed foods. It's not rocket science. It's right before us. Right. I think that what we have to do, there's certain things we can agree on. Right. And I think there's real harm being done. It's being done by diet. It's being done by, this processed food. What's the worst harm? Right. We can argue on mechanism, let's get that research done. But much of this is low-hanging fruit.
Oh, no, no question. But hasn't not been societally normalized? I'll give you an example. I have a 5-year-old son. It was his birthday this weekend. We had a birthday party for his friends. Now, my son is a 95% carnivore. He's carnivore. We could not host a party that didn't include cupcakes and pizza. And it's been so normalized, and the expectation for that kind of thing. If we just served steak and chicken, nobody would have had anything to eat. And we've normalized this as a society. And just
look.
yeah,
Hey, I lived it in tobacco.
right, exactly.
So right. I mean, so if you told me you would be able to walk into a bar, right, in Naples, Italy, and nobody was smoking, right? I mean, you would have laughed at me, right? We've changed how society views
Of course. But it's taken 50 years. And we've replaced tobacco with an even better drug called ultra processed foods. So we have
so right. I mean that is
that's a challenge. I call that a drug transfer. Yeah. What are we going to next?
Look, these are powerful agents. They change how we feel, right? I mean, we need to be able to deal with these safely, right? I mean, I never was able to manage my weight. Finally, and again, I'm here today, I mean, my percent body fat is a fraction of what it was. I can't tell you tomorrow where I'm going to be.
And that's humbling. That is humbling. You trust yourself to a certain extent, but you've also got to protect yourself as an individual. So last question, I know I really appreciate the time you've given, but
no, this is great. I mean, right. I mean, but we got to get some of this done.
Yes. And right? You are doing this. You are doing this with this petition. So I've got two questions. The first question.
So do you think politically
it has to be done politically as well as societally, and then those that are disenfranchised by the change also have to be helped. The people that work in the food industry, the farmers.
But there's no reason why they can't sell things that people will thrive on.
Oh, exactly right. But we have to respect each of those and address those. So there's farmer, there's industry, there's the financial side. There's so many aspects. But
you think there's a will in the current administration to do this?
I think there is. I think that it's butting heads against some of the massive money lobbyists, and that's the amount of money in politics is obscene, as you are well aware, having worked there. So I think that Bobby Kennedy is a carnivore. He's made that shift. If Casey Means becomes Surgeon General in some barriers, she is one of us. So the folks that are getting into power at least have this foundation in their own lives. Kelly Means is part of this. I sit on one of the Maha task forces. We're all akin. Some of the folks are out there, but I think the messaging has shifted. But we are
here's my question. Okay, how do you we can get 90% agreement here, right? I mean, what I've always found about policy, the great thing about policy is you take something that's very controversial and you try to find where there's a consensus, where there's a true consensus, right?
And that is,
and then once you find there's a real consensus, you drive that consensus,
right? Which is your petition.
I think that was the goal. I want. Robert, if I can, I want the carnivore and the vegetarian, right?
Yes.
I want all comers to look and say, look, what did we do our food supply, right? I mean, it's killing us, right? And let's change that, and let's bring along everybody, and the food industry will follow.
Yeah, this is not about changing what you are eating. This is changing your perspective on what you're not going to eat. And so I don't care if you eat vegetables or animals, but it's the ultra processed foods that we're in.
The refined process. I mean, and I think it gets us, look, the goal was I try to avoid having to define it because I actually disagree with the administration where they said, well, the first thing they have to do is define it. They're going to spend the next 5 years.
Yeah, because there's too many.
And that's why I said, move that aside. What's underlying that? And I can define processed refined carbohydrates. I know what those are. Yes. Those are the corn syrups, corn solids, right? High fructose corn syrups. I mean, those are you don't need to sit there in a committee to define what those are. I mean,
And they are the igniters of that flame. Without them, the rest doesn't work. So here's a question. I love your petition, but it is, I'll say this, it is a carefully held secret right now. Part of doing this, what is America's call to action? How can a regular citizen who may or may not agree with everything but has consensus about this, how can we be part of this venture? How can we promote and push this narrative? Are there specific pragmatic tasks as a call to action to supporting your petition?
so I appreciate that. I mean, I feel the same way. I sat down. I'm one person. I wrote the petition. I shared it with some experts, the legal experts, to make sure, it was vetted, that it was legally solid. That when the food industry took it to their lawyers, they would say, "Yep, he's right. We have a problem." Right? I would like this administration to take action. These things are not done in a week or in a year. It took us decades in tobacco, right? But I think we got to start now, right? I think what's doing us harm, right, is pretty much in view. I think we can agree on what's doing us harm, right? And it's that coming together. And look, I mean, there are key decision makers in this administration. I hope they act. I mean, in some ways, this was a gift. Was it a gift? Was it a challenge to them? If they're serious about making America healthy again, here's a real way to do it. That they have the tools, that they have the law behind them, and in fact, they have to do, because as a matter of science and law, you can't say this stuff is GRAS. It's not credible.
Right. No, I think everybody's in agreement. The folks that I know of, and I'm tangential with this, that are in power about to be, are in agreement with the general gist of the petition. The question is, to what level are they willing to take the risk of enforcement?
All they have to do is when you start by saying, "Hey, there's not a consensus, expert consensus. This can't be going forward. This can't be GRAS." Saying that, we have to have a process. I mean, to be able to have the industry to put on the table whatever science it can. I don't think at the end of the day, the industry is going to be able to show that processed refined carbohydrates have reasonable certainty of no harm. And I think we have to hold them. This is no longer about in moderation in small doses. This is as it's being used. The law requires us to look at it, its cumulative effect. Look at the damage this stuff has done.
There's no moderation in drug addiction.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So is there anything that the average citizen, I've got a pretty decent audience of folks that are intrigued, folks that are interested, but they are.
Let the administration know, the people on all sides of the aisle, right? When it comes to this, right, we have to have them change. There needs to be this change, and that they have to act, right? And I have only, when we were about to send out the letter on tobacco that said the industry may be manipulating the level of nicotine, right? That these may be drugs. These are large societal questions. I remember one of my colleagues, as I was about to send out the letter, she was standing in the doorway of my office, and she says, "If this goes badly, no one's going to be there for you," right? And I looked at her, and I just said, "What are they going to do to me?" I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you have these positions, right, and you have the opportunity to serve in these positions, what you will regret is not taking advantage of the opportunities when you have them, right? And I think this is, my goal was to make this something that everyone could look at, get behind, and say, "Yeah, that makes sense." And it's pretty simple, right? Couldn't be more simple. It just basically says, "Hey, this stuff came on the market 4 or 5 decades ago. Somebody said this was generally recognized as safe. This stuff is not generally recognized as safe." In some ways, I'm struck at how simple it is, right?
But is the FDA currently, and I know this is crystal balling, but is the FDA capable politically and from the members of making that decision?
I think, just as I did on tobacco, right? I was FDA commissioner, right? An FDA commissioner can do only so much, but an FDA commissioner and a secretary, an FDA commissioner and a secretary and a president can do a lot.
Have you had that discussion directly?
I've heard nothing so far officially.
So I do believe, and you can tell me I'm wrong, but the unofficial stance is exactly this. It's supportive of what you're doing. This is what I hear.
Well, I appreciate that. Then it's a question of time. I would like it to be done. I mean, I think again, you and I started with the metabolic harm. This is not this is an epidemic as big as they come, right? I mean, it's killing people on all sides of the aisle, all stripes, right? Rich, poor, no doubt it has its effect, in certain populations have, increased burden. I think we need to take on the American diet. I think we need to make these drugs more accessible. I think we have to provide access to the kind of care that you and your team provide, and that has to become more available. I think all those things have to be done.
So the statement in the leaked document was low carb is not mentioned. Is that too wide a notion at this early stage? Can we refine that and have somewhat of an expectation that it's ultra processed food or processed carbohydrates?
I mean, I was tell me the difference. Okay. I was very strategic. It took me a long time to come together. I didn't focus just on ultra processed foods. I didn't focus just on low carb. I focused deliberately. If you focus on processed refined carbohydrates, maybe we get 70% there, 80% there, right? But I think the advantage of focusing it that way is that we can bring everybody aboard, right? Yes. And I think any of the divides in the nutrition community today can go by the wayside. I mean, because I think that, look, just simply say that the industry has the burden. The industry has the burden to show this stuff, to say, if you're going to sell this stuff, you have to show reasonable certainty of no harm, right? And put the burden where it belongs.
And that's the FDA that's going to hold that accountability, because right now they know that, as you said, industry is not different to us, but they're not being held accountable, and it's the accountability.
Do you think this secretary is capable of doing that?
I think he's capable. I'm not sure. I know he desires that, but whether he's able to, capability and ability, somewhat different.
So what's stopping him? So what was stopping me? Well, hold it. Okay. When I took action on tobacco, you could say the same thing, right? They had more money than God, the industry, is what someone told me. They had hired all official Washington, right? Did I work for that?
But with all due respect, you lost.
No, we won.
Well, the FDA versus Brown Williamson.
Yeah, but that was a step. But 2010?
Yeah, that was 9 years later. Congress.
But that codified the rule.
Right.
Right. I mean, so rather than just even have, we got it codified in language. What did we have to do? And it's not winning. What did we do? We changed the way this country views tobacco.
Yeah.
There was that perceptual.
Or was that the seven dwarfs that changed that shot themselves in the foot? Seven dwarfs were when they sat in front of Congress and said they lied to Congress.
I believe nicotine is not addictive.
Yes.
So what is the industry going to say now?
Well, that's the question is, do we have the capacity to haul some of these big producers in front of Congress?
So where's the hearing? Do me a favor.
Have we had for processed?
I'm sorry.
Have we had a seven dwarfs event for the ultra processed? Do we need that?
I think I think this is an issue where both sides of the aisle can come together, right? Senator Marshall, Senator Booker. Right? Senator Cassidy, Senator Sanders. Rosa DeLauro, Representative Cole. When I testified about 3 months ago for FDA about drugs coming in from China, right? The one thing that every R wanted to talk to me about, they want to talk to me about processed foods.
So who's the catalyst? Who gets this?
So it's time for the hearing. Let our RFK speak, right? Let him go speak in front of the Hill. And bring in, as you said, the industry leaders. Let them have their say, and let's figure out how we get out of this mess.
So we need a seven dwarfs type hearing in front of Congress.
You need a commitment. Look, this is going to take, right? Tobacco. How long did tobacco take us? You're right. We set it in motion. We lost in the Supreme Court 5-4, but we got legislation. And today, right? At least on cigarettes, yes, we have a vaping problem. But you don't see high school seniors smoking cigarettes. Now, look, we didn't anticipate the vaping the way it should have been, but
Yeah,
damage.
high school kids in Florida vape on a regular basis. So,
But you could, you can argue the the benefits and cons of smoking versus vaping.
yeah.
But we change. But people look at that cigarette as a deadly, disgusting habit.
Oh, no question, cigarette. But I think that's a starting point that wasn't continued through. When it comes to the healthcare side, metabolic disease, I think that this is an ideal.
Yeah, but look, even our colleagues didn't get this. Even our colleagues still to this day, right?
I agree. But isn't that the narrative against lipids, against fat in our diet that is still promoted actively? That fat is bad in your diet? I mean, does that narrative amongst healthcare providers not also need to change? Because they're not paying homage or they're not articulating the dangers of processed carbohydrates versus fat in the diet. You talk to any cardiologist after a heart attack, they want you on a Mediterranean diet, lots of healthy grains and fruits. Don't eat red meat. Don't eat.
I was at American Heart, and I spoke to some of the LDLC hawks. Right. These are the ones who did the clinical trials and said, get the LDL. They believed that LDLC was causative in the causal chain of inflammatory atherosclerotic disease. Right. They would rather get someone's visceral, what they say to me, get that visceral adiposity off.
Right.
Right. You get that visceral adiposity off. If their LDLC bumps up, I'll take care of it. That's secondary. Let me get that visceral adiposity off. Right. I think they're there. I mean, they woke up on the triglyceride. They woke up on the triglycerides. I mean, and they understand that triglycerides and that hepatic adiposity, right? I mean, that is fueling the inflammation. And they're saying, look, the fact is that many of them are on low carb diets.
Right.
Right. The issue is we can argue what's sustainable over the long, nothing's sustainable over the long haul, right? I mean, yes, for some people, but GLP-1s are not sustainable for many people. Low carbs are not sustainable for many people. You have to give people a range of tools. We got to meet people where they are, right? But get rid of the fuel that's adding to the fire.
No question. But 2 months ago, RFK put out a statement against seed oils. And the American College of Cardiologists came out and said we have no evidence to support the fact that.
So look, he's focused on. Food.
I know that it's the other foot.
I mean, he's focused on food dyes. However laudable that may be, right? Getting rid of food dyes. Look, they may be a way to signatures of keeping ultra processed foods on the market. You wouldn't have ultra processed foods if you didn't have food. But they're talking about getting rid of the artificial ones and keeping the natural ones. So,
right. I mean,
so you and I know how many lives are you going to save tomorrow if you get rid of food dyes?
0.
Right. So I mean, if you get rid of processed carbohydrates, how many lives are you going to save? But
that's the distraction. I agree completely. But the seed oils was one piece that he put out, and he got pushback from the very
So there's a way to frame this, right? When we frame the question on tobacco, right? 1,000 children start to smoke every day, right? 3,000 children start to smoke every day, and 1,000 of them will go on to die of their illness, right?
That's powerful.
Right? When you realize that these processed refined carbohydrates, the 25% of us are going to end up in heart failure, 40% are going to be diabetic, right? 25% of us plus are going to have a stroke. And it's metabolic harm that's contributing to that. And you're going to spend 5-6 years, right, of your senior years in disability, right, because of this metabolic harm, right? We can agree on that. Let's frame this, right? I mean, would I prefer to use the term ultra-formulated foods and ultra-processed? Yeah.
But that's phraseology. But I think just to say what you just said, 3,000 kids start smoking. Average age of starting to smoke, I believe, is 12 or 13 years of age.
And when we did our investigation, there was a document that said, that actually brought it into very clear focus. That 12, 13, 14-year-old, there's nothing that he or she would desire. But by the time they became 16, 17, right, only when they try to stop do they realize they can't. There is nothing in this type of product that he or she, that pre-smoker, would desire. Instead, the industry document said, instead we must convince them by wholly irrational reasons, right, that they should continue, that they should want to smoke.
But let's flip this around. Let's use the same logic. I would argue that less than 1% of children under the age of 1 year are not introduced to ultra processed foods prior to their first birthday. That goldfish, that Cheerio, that cereal that they're getting, even the rice cereal, those are all ultra processed carbohydrates, and the majority of kids.
And it's time that we wake up.
Exactly. So this is at a magnitude level far greater than tobacco.
Right. So what I need you to do, right, is I think we need to figure out, just as I think the way you've said it, right, needs to be, said loud and clear. I think everybody can get behind that, right?
I agree. And the consensus is there. There's no question.
And what you take something that is highly controversial, right? Go find that consensus, right? Stay away from that stuff that's going to drive people where they can't, be there. Mm-hmm. Some people go, I'm not sure it's ultra processed. Everybody gets these processed refined carbohydrates. This administration needs to act. It's been wonderful being with you.
I really appreciate this. Thank you. We're going to publicize this widely, and hopefully
I appreciate it.
Right ears. Thank you so much.
Thank you.